Hey guys, and welcome. So what's been happening in the hobby this week? Well, I thought we'd talk about AOS, or Warhammer Fantasy. Since last week I was talking about my impressions of old 40k to new, I thought it would be only appropriate now that I'm getting into AOS that I have the same kind of, discussion on my impressions of Age of Sigmar versus, my experiences with Warhammer Fantasy. And to anyone who's coming back in the hobby now, are going to be a little bit taken back by, well, a lot of it. There's so much, but one of the biggest changes is Warhammer Fantasy and how different it is now. Not completely different. There's a lot of similarity there, but certainly it's changed. And so I thought I'd just talk about some of those differences, and both with the models that you see in front of me, and also the game itself and how it plays now. And there's a few reasons why Games Workshop has gone this direction. We might just have a little bit of a chat about it and how I feel about it. Obviously I'm getting back into it, so I must like it at least on some level, but I do think there are definitely some things that I'm sad to see go, I guess. I don't want to be too much of that old, gripey old fantasy hobby player, but there are some things about the old game that I definitely love that would have been nice to see continued on. But I understand why it's happened the way it's happened, and for a few really important reasons and intimate ones, namely that I was working with the company here in Australia at the time of, Fantasy's peak, during, that would be like 5th, 6th edition, that sort of time, would have been, early 2000s. And so I got to experience some of the best Warhammer Fantasy rule sets and army books that have been made. And, that also coincided, just soon after that with the decline, and then the inevitable change into Age of Sigmar, a few years later. But it also established such a huge aspect of what fantasy was, and the identity of a lot of the races and so on during that time, because that was again a time period, like I talked about last week with 40k, when a lot of the multi-part plastics, the new ones, were brought in. Chaos Warriors were established, that look. I mean, Adrian Smith art pretty much dominated that era, a lot of it, and his art really just nailed a lot of the imagery for a lot of the races. And that's carried forward into Age of Sigmar, but in a different way now. So let's first look at the differences in the models, because that's the easiest thing to talk about. These are my friends' ones. I don't actually have any of my own stuff. I certainly don't collect Dark Eldar, so definitely don't collect those dirty elves. But we've got some in front of me just so I can show you the differences. If anyone has never seen like super old school models, they're cute. They're small. They're fun. Next to one of these Blight Kings, these new Blight Kings, you can really see the difference there. The new models are just outstanding. That's my first impression, like when I came in and I saw not just all the other stuff that I saw with 40k and terrain and so on, but the fantasy models are unreal. The sculpting level is off the charts at the moment. It's such an amazing range. These Nurgle models are wonderful. They're probably the best, I think, that are in the range. I'm a bit biased because I love Nurgle, but they're such great models. Like every single one is a winner. Like they're all good. There's no bad sculpts in that range. They're all really amazing, and that includes the demon stuff as well. And there are tons of ranges like that. I'm not an elf player, an elder, or an elder player in 40k, but when I came in, I'll admit that those Idolith, whatever they are, Deepkin, like the ones with all the big turtle and everything, they look pretty cool. I was like, that's the first time in my entire hobby life that I've ever done a double take on an elf. And anyone that knows me knows that's a massive call to make. I don't like those stinking elves, and back in the stores and all that, everyone knew which side of the fence I was on. But that they're pretty cool looking bunch of models. It almost got me thinking about starting an army of them. Almost, not quite, but it's the closest I've ever come to actually liking an elf range. And so yeah, there's some really like amazing things, and it's been pushed into a more high fantasy style rather than that sort of slightly Germanic historical style that fantasy used to have. And so yeah, that gives them a license to do a lot more stupendous stuff and a lot more, and there's these centerpiece models now that are just really beautiful. Every army seems to have one, or most of them do, and I think that's all great. That's from a model point of view and a hobby point of view, it's amazing. However, now we move into, I guess, maybe the lore and the background. I do feel that something is slightly missing. I mean, I haven't read heaps of the lore yet, but it kind of feels a little bit, I don't know, like my first impression was it felt like World of Warcraft, with the different realms and the gates and like, I don't know heaps about World of Warcraft, but I do know that like the Warcraft world has that kind of realm idea, and that kind of wheel of like, bad to good kind of levels, and everyone kind of exists in that kind of like wheel-like structure for all of the different factions, and sort of Warhammer's kind of gone in that direction as well, where you've got this sort of like death and destruction and all of that, and they're all kind of in order, and they're all kind of dotted around that, and they're in their different realms. So it's interesting. I guess it makes it more flexible, which is something to consider, when you're designing, and that's part of the reasons why they've done this. The biggest reason is that they felt like they were sort of too hemmed in with the old fantasy lore, and they couldn't push it forward, and so they broke it apart and destroyed it. Had it basically had Sigmar come back and everything change, and it's allowed them free license to go in different directions, and that's great. Like that's all really cool, and definitely the model range is awesome. But I feel like they've kind of missed something in the background, and from my point of view, when you've got a company that's been more than 30 years now or whatever, why would you bother just icing an IP that you've had for that long, all of the stuff that you've built on that brand, just purely because of poor sales, when you could easily move that forward in a different way. They could have had the the old world still be there as one of, like, as a broken realm, like a little broken part, like they're doing now these broken realms thing or whatever. Well, you could have had like a little realm of it, rather than just the cities of Sigmar or whatever. Just have, I don't know if that actually is part of like a fragment of the old world or not, but you could have that all existing, and have them even worse off than they were before. So if any player wanted to sort of like, still utilize that, they could. And I guess Cities of Sigmar is what that is. I haven't read too far into that yet to know if that's the case. But just from a writing standpoint, that way writers and novelists could still write in that world in the current era, and maybe have the focus still in all these other realms, but have that somewhere there rather than just exploding it completely. And that would have allowed them to bring it back in any time that they felt like, rather than sort of really just remove it. And you see that now they're obviously wanting to re-establish that lore, because they're making something called Warhammer Old World, which is obviously going to be some kind of game system that's going to include that old lore and writing and world. And we have currently a game that's based on it, right? So Warhammer Total War is still a thing. They're making a third game. It's all based on that old lore and all those old characters and races. So it's definitely still loved and still very much part of the modern, I guess, zeitgeist of Games Workshop stuff. So why not keep it going? And I think that's what we're seeing. If you have a look at the Cursed City stuff and the new Soulblight stuff, you're seeing them go back and resample that old world look and feel, and that dark feel, and just that Germanic thing, all that stuff coming back in. All those releases, they're such beautiful models. If you haven't seen them, go and have a look. They're wonderful and great. And they just look like a Warhammer Fantasy Battle release. They really look like they could have come out 15 years ago. They except with a modern aesthetic, a modern sculptor's aesthetic. Their skills have come on. They're sculpting in better scales, in better forms, shape language for the sculptures themselves, and they're beautiful miniatures. and everyone's loving them. So hopefully that gives Games Workshop a bit of a clue in that people still love that old stuff and they'd like to see it within the ranges, just sprinkled in. I think that would be a really lovely thing, and help make the game better. And that's my main difference, I guess. My main gripe is just I'd like to see more of that old world stuff still in the game, just because it's better writing. Like those old stories are just more compelling. They're gonna draw people in. That's just fact. You've got 30 years to draw, and it's gonna be a much richer world than one that's only a couple of years old. And that would help just give some better grounding for the current game. Having said that, though, there are some definite interesting little bits and pieces that I do like about the new game, and that is that I've just started getting into the Flesh Eater Courts, and for an old player getting into the new stuff and finding out they're basically Bretonnians, but in this warped, sick, twisted way, that is utterly hilarious to me. So, I've really been loving their lore, like the fact that they're deranged ghouls and vampires that still think they're Bretonnians and running around like knights. That's hilarious, and hopefully all the other races have this same thing. So if they have that, that's great. I haven't really read enough to know, but if that's in a lot of the other books as well, then that's awesome. That's good that they're still tipping their hat to that older game and keeping that going. So now, in terms of a gameplay perspective, so I haven't played a game yet, but I've watched a bunch of it, and I definitely will be. The one thing I've noticed, I don't mind that it's gone to a skirmish style like 40k. I think it always had to. Even when I was working for the company, that was something that was on the air, because those big block formations, it's tough. Building an army of that is difficult. It's a lot more investment. The game itself is harder to play. Having said that, though, it did differentiate it away from 40k. So it was its own game, and I think that's something that's kind of lost in the current edition. It feels very samey. Like it's kind of the similar game. You're just playing with different models. They're not the same game, but that skirmish format, I guess. And the other game, Warhammer Fantasy, was more about maneuvering. It was more like chess, and you had to really be careful and watch your angles and everything. And that was a lot of fun. But I know why it stopped, and I'm not sad that I can't play that still. I could easily with friends that want to play fantasy. You still got the books and everything. You can do it. But the thing that I've noticed is that they've split down all of these different factions into sub-factions and sub-allegiances, smaller codexes, and what that's done is given you less choices per codex, like in terms of physical models to put in your army, and one of the biggest ones is Flesh Eater Courts. There's only 2 choices. I've only got those horror things, or they can be made as flayers or horrors, but there's basically just those 2 and ghouls, your basic crypt ghouls, and that's it. You've got 2-3 choices plus some characters. I mean, there's nothing in that list. There's literally nothing. I mean, they've got some, thankfully they have enough in there for you to be able to do some different play styles, and you can ally some other units, but as a base codex, it's awfully thin on the ground. It feels like they really need to start releasing a quantity of models for some of these army books if they want them to continue, because that's what it's going to need if it's going to compete with 40k. Even codexes that don't have a lot in their list, they're still far denser, and there's way more to it. That includes adding more CP into the game so that you can command points, so that you can have more of those stratagems going off. That's something that 40k is doing really well. It's adding a whole nother concept, a whole nother layer of complexity onto the game. And in AOS, from as far as I can tell, it's a lot more minimal aspect of the game, and the stat lines are very different. You're not comparing toughnesses anymore, so really the only durable thing you've got, apart from synergies with special rules and auras and your command point that you're getting, is your armor save, and that's it. So the game is a bit more simplified, and I don't know whether that's a good thing or not. I'm not going to say whether it's good or bad yet because I haven't played a game, but certainly you're losing a lot of value. And what I've noticed is the points costs are a bit sort of wacky as well. I'm paying 10 points for a ghoul. I'm not really sure why I'm paying 10 points for a ghoul, but maybe it'll all come clear to me when I play my first game. But yeah, some of the things seem a bit wacky and a little bit sort of out of kink to what I would expect from something like this. 40k is very different. I mean, one of those flayers I think is roughly around the same cost as like a Death Shroud Terminator, about 50 points or so, roughly, and a bit more actually. But the stat line on a Death Shroud Terminator is far superior to a Flayer. Like there's no comparison there. Yeah, the Flayer is moving fast, but the durability of the Death Shroud versus that is totally different. Now, again, yes, there's tons of these sort of battalion rules and other rules which buff them, which make them better, and so on, if you play them in a certain playstyle. But just basic stat line is like not even comparable. So I'm interested to see the way this game plays and how it differs. So yeah, I won't pass judgment on the gameplay of it too much, but certainly the codexes feel a bit light on the ground. There doesn't seem like there's a lot of choices in a lot of these books. Some do, some still have some choice, but there's definitely a whole group of codexes that don't seem to have very much going on. And beautiful models, but not a lot in the books. And I'm hoping as this game develops over the years that they will give more to it. So hopefully more people play it and they buy it, and that incentivizes Games Workshop to release more for it, because I think that would, it's really going to help. Something like Flesh Eater Courts needs like double the number of choices they've got in there to really make that feel like a real list, like a real faction. And there's so much you could do with a ghoulish list like that. There's so many different things you could do to make it interesting. So there's definitely some really nice foundations there for some great units, some great sculpts to come out, and maybe they're already planning that, I don't know, but it feels like that's what you need to really make this game sing, is to really add like another across the board, like another third, more choices for every single codex is there, and it would feel like a competitor to 40k. And also adding more stratagems and more synergy stuff on top would also help. And then and I don't think they need to worry about being so like, oh, don't get too complex. No one gets into this hobby because they want something simple. This hobby is extremely complex, in so many different ways. From the hobby side, that's complex. Everything all the investment you're doing, the whole thing of it is complex. No one wants simplicity when they're doing this. Maybe, you want a skirmish game, that's fine. We've got Warcry, you've got all those different ones. But if you're getting into the main games, either AOS or 40k, you're wanting to see that full experience. And I don't think they should shy away from, adding what they need to make it interesting, and that includes model ranges and so on. Putting their money where their mouth is and just doing it, because it's gonna benefit the game. Like, people are definitely going to get these things. If their current releases are any indication that Curse City stuff is beautiful, and if they keep doing stuff like that and having those things be allowed to be in the game and as they are, then that's amazing, and that's just gonna be a win-win for everybody, and people are gonna definitely buy it. So yeah, that's just my my initial thoughts on entering into this AOS world, the Age of Sigmar, and seeing the differences there. I definitely still miss the old game, but who knows? Maybe that Warhammer Old World new game, whatever they're making, will bring back some of that. It certainly won't be at the same scale as this. I don't think it'll be a different game or some other thing. It won't be. I very much doubt it's going to be directly competing with AOS. It'll be something else. But whatever it is, I'm glad that that's back, because that helps people that want to understand this world. I feel like the narrative and the stories are going to be way more compelling for that fantasy. It's just a darker world. It's a darker, more sinister world, and something you can relate to. The Empire is very Germanic and very low fantasy, really. When you look at the writing, it feels like maybe it's Renaissance period, in our world, in Europe, or medieval time in Europe, and that's something we can all relate to. And I feel like you really need that, especially for writing, to ground it in something that the reader can understand, and that will definitely give it a bit more of a push. So anyway, I won't rant on too much about that. I hope you've enjoyed this little session of ranting about AOS and fantasy. And if you have any thoughts on it, please feel free to leave a comment. I'd love to hear about it. But otherwise, that's it for this week. And I hope you guys are all having a good week with your hobby and so on. And yeah, I'll catch you on the next one.